The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Judge Patricia Williams' courtroom as 3-year-old Emma Martinez clutched her warm teddy bear with desperate intensity. The plush toy, once golden brown, had faded to a dull beige from countless nights of being held too tightly by trembling little hands. Emma's dark eyes, unnaturally large in her pale face, darted nervously around the imposing chamber where her fate would be decided by strangers in black robes and expensive suits. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams," the bailiff announced, his deep voice echoing off the polished wood panels that lined the courtroom walls. Emma shrank deeper into her chair in the gallery, her tiny frame nearly disappearing between the adult-sized seats. She didn't understand why everyone had to stand up, but she copied the motion, her patent leather shoes barely touching the carpeted floor. Judge Williams, a stern woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, surveyed the packed courtroom with practiced efficiency. 23 years on the family court bench had shown her every variation of human tragedy. But something about the Martinez custody case troubled her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Perhaps it was the child's unnatural stillness, or the way she seemed to disappear into herself whenever the proceedings grew heated. At the plaintiff's table, David Martinez adjusted his Italian silk tie and flashed his $1,000,000 smile at the jury of court observers. At 38, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that had built his real estate empire from nothing. His tailored Armani suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and his perfectly styled black hair showed not a strand out of place despite the early morning hour. Everything about David Martinez screamed success, stability, and respectability, exactly the image his high-powered legal team wanted to project. "Your Honor," began David's lead attorney, Harrison Blake III, a man whose grandfather had argued cases in this very courtroom decades earlier. "My client represents everything we hope for in a custodial parent. Financial stability, community standing, and an unwavering commitment to his daughter's future." Blake's voice carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a custody battle in his 30-year career. Across the aisle, Maria Martinez looked like she belonged in a different courtroom entirely. Her black dress, purchased secondhand from a thrift store, hung loosely on her thin frame. At 29, she appeared older than her years, with worry. Lines etched around her brown eyes and premature gray streaks threading through her dark hair. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to take notes on a yellow legal pad, the pen trembling between her calloused fingers. Hands that bore the evidence of long hours, spent serving coffee and clearing tables at Danny's Diner on the south side of Houston. Maria's court-appointed attorney, Rebecca Santos, was doing her best with limited resources. Fresh out of law school with significant student debt, Rebecca had taken the case as part of her pro bono requirement. She was smart and passionate, but she lacked the resources and experience of David's legal team. Every time she tried to present evidence of David's controlling behavior, Blake's objections came swift and sure, often sustained by Judge Williams, who seemed increasingly frustrated with the lack of concrete proof. "Mrs. Martinez," Judge Williams addressed Maria directly, her voice carrying a mixture of sympathy and impatience. "I need you to understand that allegations without substantiation carry little weight in my courtroom. Do you have any physical evidence, medical records, or witness testimony to support your claims of domestic violence?" Maria's voice barely rose above a whisper as she answered, "Your Honor, he was very careful. He never left marks where people could see them." And Emma, She won't talk about what happened. She's barely spoken at all since the separation. In the gallery, social worker Janet Thompson shifted uncomfortably in her seat. A 20-year veteran of Child Protective Services, Janet had interviewed Emma Martinez 6 times over the past 4 months. Each session had yielded the same result: silence. The child would sit perfectly still, sometimes playing quietly with toys, but never speaking about her home life, her parents, or anything that might help the court determine her best interests. Janet's reports painted a troubling picture of a highly intelligent child who had essentially shut down emotionally. Emma's pediatric records showed she had been meeting all developmental milestones until approximately 8 months ago, when her speech suddenly regressed and her behavior became increasingly withdrawn. The timing coincided perfectly with the escalation of her parents' marital problems. But correlation wasn't causation in the eyes of the law. Dr. Sarah Chun, Houston's most respected child psychologist, had been brought in as an expert witness. Her evaluation of Emma revealed classic symptoms of childhood trauma: hypervigilance, regression in developmental milestones, and an unusual startle response to loud noises or sudden movements. But Emma's silence made it impossible to determine the source of her distress definitively. The child exhibits clear signs of psychological distress, Dr. Chun testified, her professional demeanor masking deep concern for Emma's well-being. However, without verbal communication from the patient, I cannot determine whether this trauma stems from the divorce proceedings themselves or from more specific incidents within the home environment. David's team seized on this uncertainty, like sharks sensing blood in the water. Your Honor, Blake argued with theatrical flair, Dr. Chun's own testimony confirms that divorce proceedings are traumatic for children. My client's ex-wife is attempting to weaponize their daughter's natural response to family disruption. We cannot allow vindictive accusations to supersede the clear evidence of Mr. Martinez's superior ability to provide for his child's future. As the morning wore on, Emma remained motionless in her chair, occasionally glancing toward her mother with an expression far too knowing for a 3-year-old. She seemed to understand that these adults were deciding our future, but she had no voice in the conversation that would determine where she lived, whom she lived with, and whether she would ever feel safe again. Judge Williams called for a 30-minute recess, her gavel striking the bench with finality that seemed to echo Emma's unspoken fears. As the courtroom emptied, the little girl stayed seated, holding her teddy bear close and staring at the American flag in the corner, a symbol of justice that felt impossibly distant from her small, silent world. Nobody in that courtroom suspected that this quiet child possessed information that would soon turn their orderly legal proceeding into chaos, or that her eventual testimony would send shockwaves far beyond the walls of family court. Emma Martinez was about to prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truths. Dr. Sarah Chun's office on the 15th floor of Houston Methodist Hospital had witnessed countless revelations over her 20-year career, but nothing had prepared her for what she discovered during Emma Martinez's psychological evaluation. The child sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor, methodically arranging colorful wooden blocks into perfect geometric patterns with an obsession that sent chills down the experienced psychologist's spine. "Emma, sweetheart," Dr. Chun spoke in the gentle, measured tone she reserved for her most fragile patients. "Can you tell me about your favorite place to play at home?" The question was deliberately open-ended, designed to encourage natural conversation. But Emma's response was anything but natural. The 3-year-old's entire body went rigid. Her small hands froze mid-motion over the blocks, and her breathing became shallow and rapid. Dr. Chun recognized the signs immediately. A trauma response, triggered by something as simple as the mention of home. Emma's dark eyes darted toward the office door, as if calculating escape routes, before she resumed her compulsive block arranging with renewed intensity. Dr. Chun made careful notes in her leather-bound journal. Patient exhibits hypervigilance and flight response when discussing domestic environment. Compulsive organizing behavior suggests attempt to control chaotic internal emotional state. She had seen these patterns before in children who had experienced profound trauma, but rarely in someone so young. The breakthrough came during their third session, when Dr. Chun introduced art therapy materials. Emma had been reluctant to engage with traditional toys, but something about the crayons and white paper seemed to unlock a door in her carefully guarded psyche. Her first drawing was crude, but unmistakable. Stick figures with one noticeably larger than the others, looming over smaller forms with what appeared to be raised appendages. "Can you tell me about your picture, Emma?" Dr. Chun asked, keeping her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. Emma's response was barely audible. "Big one is angry. Little ones hide." Dr. Chun's heart rate quickened. "Where do the little ones hide, sweetheart?" Emma's crayon moved across the paper with sudden urgency, drawing what looked like a rectangular box with lines inside. "In the dark place? Very quiet. No talking in dark place." The implications were staggering. Dr. Chun had worked with enough abused children to recognize the signs. Emma was describing a hiding place, likely a closet, where she took refuge from domestic violence. The no-talking rule suggested systematic intimidation designed to ensure silence. Meanwhile, across town in the gleaming conference room of Blake and Associates, David Martinez's legal team was constructing their character assassination campaign against Maria with military precision. Harrison Blake III spread photographs across the mahogany table like a general planning a battlefield strategy. "Gentlemen, we have everything we need to destroy the mother's credibility," Blake announced to his team of associate lawyers. Financial instability, documented depression following the divorce, and a history of what we can characterize as emotional manipulation of the child. His voice carried the cold satisfaction of a predator who had cornered his prey. Blake's associate, Jonathan Miles, an ambitious young lawyer desperate to make partner, leaned forward eagerly. "Sir, we've also discovered that Maria Martinez was prescribed anxiety medication following the separation. We can paint this as mental instability affecting her parenting capacity." David sat at the head of the table, his expensive suit immaculate. Despite the stress of the proceedings, his facade of concerned fatherhood occasionally slipped, revealing glimpses of the controlling personality that had terrorized his family behind closed doors. "Whatever it takes," he said quietly, his voice carrying an undertone that made even his own lawyers uncomfortable. "I will not lose my daughter to that woman." The character witnesses David's team had assembled read like a who's who of Houston's elite social circle. Country club members, business associates, and charity board members lined up to testify about David Martinez's outstanding reputation in the community. Each had been carefully coached by Blake's team to emphasize David's financial success, community involvement, and apparent devotion to his daughter. Mrs. Eleanor Hastings, president of the Houston Children's Charity Gala, testified with regal authority about David's generous donations and public commitment to child welfare. "Mr. Martinez has contributed over $200,000 to children's causes in the past 3 years alone," she declared, her diamond jewelry catching the courtroom lights. "His dedication to improving children's lives is beyond question." What Mrs. Hastings didn't know, what none of David's character witnesses knew, was that his public philanthropy served as perfect cover for his private cruelty. The man who wrote checks to children's charities went home each night to systematically terrorize his own child into silence. Dr. Chun's most disturbing discovery came during Emma's fourth evaluation session. While playing with dollhouse figures, Emma enacted a scene that made the psychologist's blood run cold. She positioned a large male figure over smaller figures, making harsh whispering sounds. "What is the big person saying, Emma?" Dr. Chun asked, though she dreaded the answer. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper so quiet Dr. Chun had to lean forward to hear. "Big person says bad things happen to little persons who talk. Big person says no one believes little persons anyway." The sophisticated psychological manipulation. revealed in Emma's words was far beyond what a 3-year-old could fabricate. Someone had systematically programmed this child to believe that speaking out would result in punishment, and that adults wouldn't believe her testimony anyway. It was a textbook case of coercive control applied to a victim too young to understand. She was being psychologically imprisoned. Dr. Chun immediately contacted Child Protective Services, but Janet Thompson's hands were tied by bureaucratic limitations. "Doctor, I understand your concerns, but we need more concrete evidence," Janet explained during their phone conversation. A child's play therapy revelations aren't admissible in court without corroborating physical evidence or witness testimony. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Dr. Chun. The very system designed to protect children was failing Emma because her abuser had been too clever to leave traditional evidence. David Martins had weaponized the legal system's burden of proof requirements, using them as a shield to protect his crimes. As the custody hearing resumed, Dr. Chun watched Emma sitting silently in the gallery, her small frame dwarfed by the adult world determining her fate. The child possessed the key to her own salvation, but trauma had locked that truth behind walls of fear and programmed silence. Dr. Chun made a decision that would either save Emma Martinez or destroy her own career in the process. The traditional approach wasn't working, and desperate times called for desperate measures. She was about to propose something unprecedented in family court history, bringing a traumatized 3-year-old directly into the intimidating courtroom environment in one final attempt to break through the barriers that kept her truth imprisoned. Nobody suspected that this last-ditch effort would trigger a chain of events that would expose one of Houston's most carefully hidden monsters. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Sarah Chun's office hummed with an almost electric tension as she stared at the phone in her hand, debating whether to make the most controversial call of her professional career. Emma's latest therapy session had yielded disturbing new revelations, and time was running out. Judge Williams was scheduled to render her custody decision in less than 48 hours, and all evidence pointed toward awarding custody to David Martinez, based on his financial superiority and sterling public reputation. Dr. Chun's fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the courthouse. "Judge Williams' chambers, this is Margaret speaking," came the crisp voice of the judge's longtime secretary. "Margaret, this is Dr. Sarah Chun. I need an emergency meeting with Judge Williams regarding the Martinez custody case. I have critical information that could affect the outcome." Dr. Chun's voice carried an urgency that cut through the usual bureaucratic pleasantries. 20 minutes later, Dr. Chun sat across from Judge Williams in the oak-paneled chambers that had witnessed countless difficult decisions. The judge looked exhausted, her usually perfect gray hair slightly disheveled from running her hands through it while reviewing case files late into the evening. "Doctor, I'll be frank with you," Judge Williams began, removing her reading glasses and fixing Dr. Chun with a penetrating stare. "I've been on this bench for 23 years, and the Martinez case is keeping me awake at night. My instincts tell me something isn't right, but the evidence overwhelmingly favors the father. What do you have for me?" Dr. Chun opened her leather portfolio and carefully removed Emma's drawings, spreading them across the judge's desk like pieces of evidence at a crime scene. "Your Honor, these images tell a story of systematic psychological and physical abuse. This child has been programmed to remain silent through sophisticated coercive control tactics." Judge Williams studied the crude stick figure drawings with growing alarm. One showed larger figures looming over smaller ones, with what appeared to be raised fists. Another depicted a small figure hiding in what looked like a dark, enclosed space with the words "Quiet Place" written in an adult's handwriting, clearly. Emma had asked someone to help her label her refuge. "The most disturbing revelation came yesterday," Dr. Chun continued, her professional composure barely masking her emotional investment in the case. "Emma told me that the big person, promises bad things will happen if she talks, and that no one would believe her anyway. This level of psychological manipulation doesn't develop spontaneously in a 3-year-old mind, Your Honor. Judge Williams leaned back in her leather chair, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. Dr. Chun, I understand your concerns, but child psychology isn't admissible evidence in the same way DNA or fingerprints are. David Martinez's legal team would tear apart any testimony based on a child's drawings and play therapy sessions. That's exactly why I'm proposing something unprecedented, Dr. Chun said, leaning forward with desperate intensity. I want to bring Emma into the courtroom for direct testimony. Not in chambers, not through video recording, but live testimony. In open court. The suggestion hung in the air like a verbal bombshell. Judge Williams' eyebrows shot up in alarm. Doctor, that's professionally reckless and potentially traumatic for the child. A 3-year-old testifying in open court? The appellate courts would have my head, and rightfully so. Your Honor, this child is already traumatized. She's living in a state of constant fear, programmed to believe that speaking the truth will result in punishment. Traditional interview methods have failed because her abuser was too sophisticated in his psychological manipulation. But Emma has been making breakthrough progress in our sessions. She's starting to understand that some adults can be trusted with the truth. Dr. Chun pulled out her final piece of evidence, a recording device no larger than a smartphone. Yesterday, Emma spoke about specific incidents for the first time. With her mother's permission, I recorded our session. I think you need to hear this, Your Honor. Judge Williams nodded grimly, and Dr. Chun pressed play. Emma's tiny voice filled the chambers, made even more heartbreaking by the innocent cadence of a child trying to articulate unspeakable experiences. Big person gets very angry when little person makes noise. Big person says quiet or bad things happen. Little person goes to dark place and counts to very big numbers. Sometimes little person stays in dark place for a very long time until big person goes away. The recording continued with Emma describing hiding in her bedroom closet during her parents' fights. But the details she provided about those fights painted a picture of systematic domestic violence rather than typical marital disputes. She described her father throwing objects, breaking dishes, and making her mother cry in ways that suggested physical violence beyond normal arguments. Judge Williams stopped the recording, her face pale. My God, the specificity of her descriptions. These aren't fabricated memories or coached responses. Exactly, Dr. Chun pressed her advantage. Emma's abuser made one crucial mistake. He assumed the 3-year-old wouldn't remember or couldn't articulate her experiences. But children are remarkably observant, and trauma often enhances memory retention. She remembers everything, Your Honor. She just needs the right environment to feel safe enough to share it. A judge stood and walked to her window, staring out at the Houston skyline as she wrestled with the decision. Bringing a toddler into formal court proceedings violated every traditional protocol for protecting child witnesses. But failing to give Emma a voice might sentence her to years of continued abuse. Dr. Chun, if I allow this, you understand the risks? If Emma shuts down in the courtroom environment, or if her testimony is deemed inadmissible, David Martinez walks away with full custody and likely grounds for an appeal. We'd be gambling this child's entire future on one moment of courtroom testimony. Your Honor, we're already gambling her future by ignoring her truth. At least this way, she has a chance to save herself. Judge Williams turned back to face Dr. Chun, her expression resolving into the steely determination that had served her well during difficult decisions over the decades. I'll allow it, but with strict conditions. The courtroom will be cleared, except for essential personnel. No media, limited gallery seating, and I want child advocacy specialists present. If at any moment I determine this is harming Emma, we Stop immediately. Dr. Chun felt a surge of relief mixed with terror. She had just convinced a judge to attempt something that could either save Emma Martinez or destroy both their careers in the process. Thank you, Your Honor. I'll need time to prepare Emma for the courtroom environment. You have 24 hours, Doctor. And Dr. Chun? Judge Williams' voice carried a warning. You better be right about this child. If we traumatize her further in pursuit of justice, we'll have failed her in the worst possible way. As Dr. Chun left the courthouse, she knew she had just set in motion events that would either expose one of Houston's most carefully hidden predators or result in a professional catastrophe that would haunt her for the rest of her career. Emma Martinez, a 3-year-old child who had been systematically silenced by fear, was about to become the star witness in her own salvation. The next 24 hours would determine whether truth could overcome the sophisticated lies of a master manipulator, or whether the legal system would once again fail its most vulnerable victim. The morning of March 15th dawned gray and ominous over Houston, as if the sky itself sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold in Judge Patricia Williams' courtroom. By 8:30 a.m., the courthouse buzzed with an electric tension that had court. Staff whispering in hushed tones about the unprecedented proceedings scheduled for that day. Dr. Sarah Chun arrived at the courthouse an hour early, her normally steady hands trembling as she carried a small bag filled with Emma's comfort items. The faded teddy bear, a blanket that still smelled like home, and a coloring book with fresh crayons. She had spent the previous evening at Maria Martinez's apartment, carefully preparing Emma for what would either be the most important testimony of the child's life or a traumatic disaster that would haunt them all. Remember, sweetheart, Dr. Chun had told Emma the night before, the nice judge lady just wants to know about your feelings. You can tell her anything that's in your heart, and I'll be right there with you. Emma had nodded solemnly, her dark eyes showing an understanding, far beyond her 3 years. Inside the courtroom, security had been tripled. Bailiff Martinez, no relation to the family, stood at attention near the witness stand, his usual stoic expression betrayed by nervous energy that rippled through his shoulders. Even he understood that today's proceedings would be talked about in legal circles for decades to come. Harrison Blake III paced behind the defense table like a caged predator, his usual courtroom confidence shaken by the unknown variable Emma represented. For the first time in his illustrious career, he couldn't predict or control the key witness. His expensive suit, usually armor-like in its perfection, felt restrictive and uncomfortable as sweat began to bead along his collar despite the courthouse's aggressive air conditioning. David Martinez sat ramrod straight at the defendant's table, his public mask of concerned fatherhood firmly in place. But those who knew what to look for could see the micro-expressions of rage flickering across his features. His hands, carefully folded on the polished wood surface, gripped each other with such intensity that his knuckles had turned white. 20 years of carefully constructed lies and manipulation were about to face their ultimate test. Maria Martinez occupied the front row of the gallery, flanked by 2 victims' advocates from the Houston Women's Shelter. Her hands shook as she clutched a tissue, her eyes never leaving the courtroom entrance where her daughter would soon appear. The past 24 hours had been the longest of her life, filled with prayer, tears, and the desperate hope that Emma's voice would finally be heard. At exactly 10 a.m., Judge Williams entered the courtroom, her black robes billowing with an authority that seemed to fill every corner of the chamber. Court is now in session in the matter of Martinez versus Martinez. Custody proceedings, she announced, her voice carrying unusual gravity. Before we begin, I want to make clear that today's proceedings are highly irregular and are being conducted solely in the interest of determining the truth in this matter. The judge's eyes swept across the courtroom, taking in the tense faces of everyone present. Dr. Chun, please bring in the minor witness. The massive oak doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a creak that seemed to echo forever in the hushed chamber. Dr. Chan appeared first, her professional composure masking the anxiety churning in her stomach. Behind her, moving with the uncertain steps of a child thrust into an adult world, came Emma Martinez. Emma's tiny patent leather shoes squeaked against the polished marble floor with each hesitant step. She wore a simple blue dress that Maria had purchased specifically for this day, and she clutched her teddy bear against her chest, like a shield against the overwhelming formal atmosphere. Her wide dark eyes took in the towering ceiling, the imposing judicial bench, and the sea of adult faces all focused on her with an intensity that made her small frame seem even more fragile. The walk from the courtroom doors to the witness stand felt like it took hours, though in reality, it was less than 30 seconds. Every person in that chamber held their breath as they watched this tiny child navigate the most important moment of her young life. David's reaction was immediate and visceral. The moment Emma entered the courtroom, his carefully maintained facade cracked just enough for those watching closely to see the flash of raw fury in his eyes. His jaw clenched with such force that a muscle in his cheek began to twitch visibly. This was his daughter, his property, his victim, and she was about to betray him in the most public way possible. Dr. Chun helped Emma onto the witness stand, a specially modified chair that had been adjusted to accommodate her small stature. The microphone had been lowered and angled to capture her soft voice, and a court reporter positioned herself to catch every word of what might be the most significant testimony in family court history. "Emma," Judge Williams began, her usually stern voice gentled to a tone she typically reserved for her own grandchildren. "Do you know why you're here today?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "To tell about feelings." "That's right, sweetheart. And remember, you're safe here. No one can hurt you for telling the truth." Judge Williams glanced meaningfully at David, whose mask of concerned fatherhood was beginning to slip more noticeably. Dr. Chun positioned herself where Emma could see her easily, offering silent encouragement through warm smiles and gentle nods. "Emma," the psychologist said softly, "can you tell the judge about your safe place at home?" For a moment that stretched into eternity, Emma said nothing. The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar. David leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into his daughter with an intensity that made several court observers uncomfortable. Then Emma's lips began to move, and two words escaped in a whisper so soft that everyone in the courtroom strained to hear them. "Daddy hurts." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Those two simple words, spoken in the innocent voice of a 3-year-old, hit the courtroom like a physical force. Harrison Blake shot to his feet, his usual eloquence abandoned in favor of frantic damage control. "Objection," leading the witness. "This child has obviously been coached." But Judge Williams was already banging her gavel, her face pale but resolute. "Overruled," continued Dr. Chun. Empowered by finally speaking her truth, Emma's voice grew slightly stronger. "Daddy hurts Emma. Daddy's scary when angry. Emma hides." In dark place, David's control finally snapped. He half rose from his chair, his face contorting with rage, before Blake grabbed his arm and forced him back down. But the damage was done. Everyone in that courtroom had seen the mask slip completely away, revealing the predator underneath. Maria Martinez collapsed into sobs, months of suppressed fear and guilt pouring out as her daughter's truth finally filled the chamber. The victim's advocates wrapped protective arms around her shaking shoulders. Emma, meanwhile, seemed to grow more confident with each word. For the first time in months, adults were listening to her, believing her, protecting her. The words that had been imprisoned by fear and manipulation began flowing like water breaking through a dam. "Daddy says Emma never tell, but Emma tells now. Emma not scared anymore. Those simple statements from a 3-year-old had just destroyed David Martinez's carefully constructed world and exposed years of hidden abuse to the harsh light of justice. The silence that had protected him had finally been broken by the smallest, bravest voice in that courtroom. Detective Michael Rodriguez's phone started ringing before he had even finished his morning coffee. The veteran investigator, who specialized in domestic violence and child abuse cases for the Houston Police Department, knew that when his phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m., someone's world was about to implode. What he didn't expect was that the call would launch the most explosive investigation of his 22-year career. "Rodriguez here," he answered, still squinting against the early morning sunlight streaming through his kitchen window. "Detective, this is Ada Patricia Morales. We need you at the courthouse immediately. We have a situation with the Martinez custody case that's about to become a felony investigation." The assistant district attorney's voice carried an urgency that made Rodriguez abandon his breakfast and reach for his badge. By 8:15 a.m., Rodriguez was sitting in Judge Williams' chambers, watching grainy courtroom security footage of Emma Martinez's testimony from the previous day. The tiny girl's words, "Daddy hurts," echoed through the small speakers with devastating clarity. But it was David Martinez's reaction that caught the detective's trained eye. The moment of uncontrolled rage, quickly suppressed but clearly visible, told Rodriguez everything he needed to know about the man's true nature. "Your Honor, based on this child's testimony and the defendant's reaction, I'm requesting an immediate criminal investigation into allegations of child abuse and domestic violence," Ada Morales announced, her voice carrying the weight of prosecutorial authority. Within hours, Rodriguez's investigation had transformed from routine inquiry to full-scale criminal probe. His first stop was the Martinez family's former home, a sprawling mansion in River Oaks that screamed wealth and respectability. But Rodriguez had learned long ago that monsters often hid behind the most beautiful facades. The house itself told a story. Fresh paint in the master bedroom couldn't quite hide the fist-sized holes in the drywall that had been hastily repaired. New carpeting in the hallway bore the chemical smell of recent installation, suggesting someone had been eager to eliminate evidence of what might have occurred there. Most telling was Emma's bedroom, a space so meticulously organized it looked more like a museum display than a child's room. Rodriguez's partner, Detective Lisa Kim, emerged from Emma's closet with a discovery that made both investigators' blood run cold. "Mike, you need to see this," she called, her voice tight with controlled anger. Inside the small walk-in closet, hidden behind hanging clothes, they found what could only be described as a survival kit created by a terrified child. A small blanket, crackers wrapped in plastic, a sippy cup, and most heartbreaking of all, a collection of small toys arranged with obsessive precision. The closet walls bore tiny scratch marks at child height, evidence of countless hours spent hiding in that cramped, dark space. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez muttered, photographing the makeshift refuge. This kid was living in a war zone. The investigation's momentum accelerated exponentially when Rodriguez began interviewing neighbors. The carefully maintained silence that had protected David Martinez for years began cracking like ice under spring sun. Mrs. Dorothy Chun, an elderly widow who lived next door, was the first to break ranks. "I always wondered about those noises," she admitted, wringing her hands nervously as she spoke to Rodriguez on her front porch. "Late at night, you'd hear shouting, things breaking. But David Martinez was such a pillar of the community. I convinced myself it was just loud television or construction work." Mrs. Chun's revelation opened floodgates. The mailman reported seeing Maria Martinez with suspicious bruises that she explained away as clumsiness. The family's former housekeeper, Rosa Gutierrez, came forward with a story that made Rodriguez's stomach turn. "Senator Martinez He had a terrible temper, Rosa explained in halting English, her hands shaking as she recalled memories she had tried to suppress. He would scream at Senora Martinez until she cried, and little Emma, she would run and hide. I found her once, curled up in that closet, whispering to herself to be very, very quiet. Why didn't you report this? Rodriguez asked gently, though he already knew the answer. Senator Martinez, he told me if I ever talked about his family, business, he would have me deported. He knew I was working without proper papers. I was too scared, Detective. I hate myself for not protecting that little girl. The investigation's scope expanded when Rodriguez discovered that David's abuse extended beyond his immediate family. His former business partners came forward with stories of explosive rages, intimidation tactics, and behavior that painted a picture of a man who used fear as his primary tool of control. Jonathan Reeves, David's former real estate partner, described incidents that revealed the true extent of David's manipulative nature. David was brilliant at public relations, Reeves explained during his recorded interview. He could charm anyone at cocktail parties or charity galas. But behind closed doors, he was a different person entirely. I saw him reduce grown men to tears with his verbal abuse. If he could do that to business associates, I can't imagine what he put his family through. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, David's own security system. Rodriguez obtained warrants for the digital recordings from the cars. Holmes' elaborate surveillance setup, which David had installed ostensibly for family protection. What they found was a catalog of horror spanning nearly 2 years. The footage showed David's escalating pattern of abuse with chilling clarity. Arguments that started as verbal disagreements escalated to furniture being thrown, doors being slammed, and Maria cowering in corners while toddler Emma fled to her closet sanctuary. The cameras had captured everything David thought no one would ever see. One particularly disturbing video from 6 months earlier showed David cornering Emma in the kitchen after she had accidentally spilled juice. The audio caught his menacing whisper, "Little girls who make messes get put in the dark place for a very long time. And little girls who tell tales about daddy get put there forever." Dr. Sarah Chun's expert analysis of the footage confirmed what Rodriguez had suspected. This was systematic, psychological torture designed to break a child's spirit and ensure her silence. What we're seeing here is sophisticated coercive control, Dr. Chun explained to the investigative team. David Martinez didn't just abuse his daughter physically. He programmed her to believe that speaking out would result in even worse punishment. Ada Morales reviewed the mounting evidence with grim satisfaction. "Detective Rodriguez, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of child abuse I've ever prosecuted. We have video evidence, witness testimony, physical evidence from the home, and most importantly, the victim's own words." The investigation that had begun with a 3-year-old's whispered confession had mushroomed into a criminal case that would expose the dark reality behind one of Houston's most respected facades. David Martinez's carefully constructed world of lies and intimidation was crumbling, brought down by the tiny voice he had worked so hard to silence. As Rodriguez prepared the arrest warrant, he reflected on the case's broader implications. How many other children were suffering in silence behind closed doors? How many other predators were hiding behind charitable donations and community respect? Emma Martinez's courage in speaking 2 simple words had not only saved herself, but was about to trigger a reckoning that would reverberate far beyond one Houston courtroom. The investigation was just beginning, but already it was clear that the truth, once unleashed, was an unstoppable force. The story broke on Channel 2 News at exactly 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, delivered by veteran anchor Rebecca Martinez, no relation to the family, with the gravity reserved for only the most shocking local stories. Tonight at 6, prominent Houston businessman David Martinez arrested on charges of child abuse and domestic violence following unprecedented courtroom testimony by his 3-year-old daughter. The news hit Houston's elite social circles like a nuclear bomb. Within minutes, phones were ringing in River Oaks mansions, country club lounges, and corporate boardrooms across the city. The man they had celebrated, donated alongside, and welcomed into their most exclusive circles, had been revealed as a monster hiding in plain sight. At the Houston Country Club, where David had been a member in good standing for over a decade, an emergency board meeting was hastily convened. Club President Harrison Whitmore III, his face ashen as he addressed the gathered board members, struggled to find words adequate for the situation. "Gentlemen, we are facing an unprecedented crisis of reputation," Whitmore announced to the 12 board members seated around the mahogany table in the club's private conference room. "David Martinez has been a significant contributor to our children's charity events. His name is on a plaque in our youth center. We need immediate damage control." Board member Eleanor Hastings, the same woman who had testified as a character witness for David, sat in stunned silence, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she processed the implications. "My God," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I testified on his behalf. I told the court he was devoted to children. How could I have been so blind?" The club's response was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, David's membership was revoked. His name was being sandblasted off the youth center plaque, and his portrait was removed from the wall of distinguished members. But the damage to the institution's reputation was already done. How could Houston's most exclusive club have harbored such a monster without detecting his true nature? The ripple effects spread far beyond the country club's marble halls. At Martinez Development Corporation, David's real estate empire, chaos reigned as investors and partners scrambled to distance themselves from the toxic brand. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors as lawyers worked frantically to assess liability and protect remaining assets. "We're looking at complete corporate dissolution," announced Chief Financial Officer Margaret Wells to the company's remaining partners. 3 major development deals have been canceled in the past 12 hours. Our investors are fleeing faster than we can document. The Martinez name has become synonymous with child abuse. But perhaps nowhere was the community response more visceral than at Emma's former daycare center, Little Lambs Learning Academy, where Director Susan Patterson was forced to confront her own complicity in overlooking warning signs. Patterson had run the upscale facility for 15 years, priding herself on maintaining the highest standards of child protection. "I keep asking myself how we missed this," Patterson confided to her assistant director, tears streaming down her face as they reviewed Emma's file. "She was always so quiet, so well-behaved. We thought she was just naturally reserved. But now I realize she was terrified into silence." The daycare's staff members were experiencing their own crisis of conscience. Teacher Maria Santos remembered occasions when Emma had seemed unusually distressed after weekend visits with her father, but the signs had been dismissed as typical adjustment issues from divorced families. "There was this one Monday morning," Santos recalled during an emotional staff meeting. "Emma came in with what looked like finger marks on her upper arms. When I asked her about it, she said she fell down. I believed her because she was such a truthful child, but now, my God, now I realize she was protecting herself the only way she knew how." The community's response wasn't limited to institutions and professionals. Ordinary citizens found themselves grappling with uncomfortable questions about their own ability to recognize abuse hiding behind respectable facades. Houston's domestic violence shelters reported a 300% increase in calls within a week of Emma's story breaking. At the Women's Center of Greater Houston, Director Patricia Morales found herself overwhelmed by the response. "Emma's courage has given voice to countless other victims who have been suffering in silence. Morales explained to the stream of volunteers and donors arriving at the shelter. We're getting calls from women who say they finally realize they're not alone, that their children's behavioral changes might be signs of abuse they've been missing. The story resonated particularly powerfully with other mothers who recognized their own struggles in Maria Martinez's situation. Support groups formed organically on social media, with women sharing their own experiences of being trapped by economically powerful abusers who use the legal system as a weapon. Jennifer Williams, a single mother from the Heights, organized one of the first Emma's Voice support meetings at a local community center. When I heard about that little girl finding the courage to speak up, it gave me strength to finally report my ex-husband's abuse, she told the gathered women. If a 3-year-old can face down her abuser in a courtroom, then I can face mine too. The case also sparked intense debate about the family court system's ability to protect children from sophisticated abusers. Legal experts appeared on local news programs, discussing the challenges of identifying abusers who present well in court while systematically terrorizing their families behind closed doors. The Martinez case exposes a fundamental flaw in how we evaluate fitness for custody, explained family law professor Dr. Amanda Rodriguez during a Channel 13 interview. We've been giving too much weight to financial stability and public reputation, while failing to develop better tools for detecting coercive control and psychological abuse. Perhaps most significantly, Emma's story reached other children trapped in similar situations. Houston Children's Hospital reported an unprecedented number of children spontaneously disclosing abuse during routine medical appointments, with many specifically referencing the little girl who told the judge the truth. Child psychologist Dr. Michael Chun noted the phenomenon during a conference with other mental health professionals. Emma Martinez has become a symbol of empowerment for children who previously felt powerless. They're saying things like, if Emma can tell the truth, maybe I can too. We're seeing breakthroughs in cases that have been stagnant for months. The community's response reached a crescendo when Houston Mayor Patricia Johnson announced the establishment of the Emma Martinez Child Protection Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to train professionals, educators, and community members to better recognize signs of abuse and coercive control. Emma Martinez, at 3 years old, showed more courage than most adults display in a lifetime, Mayor Johnson declared during the press conference announcing the initiative. Her 2 words, "Daddy hurts," have sparked a community-wide examination of how we protect our most vulnerable citizens. We owe it to Emma and countless other children to ensure their voices are heard and believed. The transformation was remarkable. A case that had begun with one frightened child's whispered testimony had evolved into a citywide movement for child protection and domestic violence awareness. Emma Martinez's courage had not only saved herself, but had awakened an entire community to the reality that monsters often hide behind the most respectable masks. As the investigation continued and criminal proceedings moved forward, Houston found itself fundamentally changed by the testimony of its smallest, bravest witness. The Harris County Grand Jury room had never felt more charged with tension than on the morning of April 3rd, when 23 citizens gathered to decide whether David Martinez would face felony charges. Foreman Patricia Wilson, a retired teacher with 30 years of experience working with children, felt the weight of responsibility as she called the session to order. The evidence presented over the past week had been overwhelming, but nothing had prepared the jurors for what they were about to witness. Ada Patricia Morales stood before the grand jury with the confidence of a prosecutor who knew she held an airtight case. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see represents one of the most systematic cases of child abuse and psychological manipulation our office has ever prosecuted. Her voice carried the gravity of someone who had spent months building a case that would forever change how the legal system viewed coercive control. The first piece of evidence was the security camera footage from the Martinez home. The jury watched in horrified silence as David's true nature was revealed in high-definition clarity. The man who had charmed Houston society was exposed as a monster who terrorized his own family behind closed doors. Juror Maria Santos, herself a mother of 3, wiped tears from her eyes as she watched tiny Emma flee to her closet refuge, while her parents' argument escalated to violence. This is systematic psychological torture of a child, Ada Morales explained as the footage played. Notice how deliberately Mr. Martinez corners his daughter, how he uses his physical size to intimidate her, and most importantly, listen to his words. The audio captured David's menacing whisper, "Little girls who tell tales disappear forever." Grand jury member Robert Chun, a retired police officer, had seen his share of domestic violence cases, but nothing quite like this. The sophistication of this abuse is staggering, he later told his fellow jurors during their deliberation. This wasn't crimes of passion. This was calculated, systematic destruction of a child's sense of safety and voice. The evidence continued mounting with devastating precision. Dr. Sarah Chun's psychological evaluation revealed the extent of Emma's trauma programming. This child was systematically conditioned to believe that speaking about her abuse would result in abandonment or worse harm. Dr. Chun testified via video conference to the grand jury. The level of psychological manipulation required to achieve this level of silence in a normally verbal child indicates sophisticated knowledge of coercive control techniques. Perhaps most damning was the testimony of Rosa Gutierrez, the former housekeeper whose immigration status David had weaponized to ensure her silence. Through a Spanish interpreter, Rosa described incidents that painted David as a predator who carefully calculated every aspect of his abuse to avoid detection. Senator Martinez would wait until the neighbors were away to have his worst episodes. Rosa testified, her voice shaking with emotion she had suppressed for years. He told me that rich men like him could make people like me disappear if we caused trouble. I was too scared for my own family to protect little Emma, and that shame will haunt me forever. The grand jury's deliberation lasted less than 2 hours. When they returned with their decision, Foreman Wilson's voice was steady but emotional. We, the grand jury of Harris County, Texas, find probable cause to indict David Eduardo Martinez on the following charges: aggravated child abuse, continuous, violence against the family, witness intimidation, and assault causing bodily injury. The formal indictment sent shockwaves through David's remaining support network. His legal team, once confident in their ability to paint him as a victim of vindictive accusations, found themselves facing mountains of irrefutable evidence. Harrison Blake III, the veteran attorney who had never lost a custody case, was forced to confront the reality that his client was guilty of unthinkable crimes. "David, the evidence against you is overwhelming," Blake told his client during a tense meeting at the Harris County Jail, where David was being held without bail. The grand jury saw everything: the videos, heard the witnesses, reviewed the psychological evaluations. "We need to seriously consider a plea agreement." But David's narcissistic personality couldn't accept the reality of his situation. Even behind bars, dressed in Orange County jail scrubs instead of his expensive suits, he maintained his innocence with the same manipulative charm that had fooled Houston society for years. This is all orchestrated by Maria and that psychologist, David insisted, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he had used to manipulate countless victims. "I coached Emma to say those things. A 3-year-old can't possibly understand the implications of her testimony." Blake, however, had reviewed the security footage and witness testimony. For the first time in his career, he was representing someone he knew was guilty of horrific crimes against a child. "David, I've seen the evidence. Your own security cameras. recorded you abusing your daughter. Multiple witnesses have testified to your pattern of control and intimidation. The psychological evaluation shows Emma's trauma is consistent with systematic abuse, not coaching. The breaking point came when prosecutors offered David a plea agreement: plead guilty to reduced charges and serve 8 years with possibility of parole, or face trial on the full indictment with the possibility of 25 years to life. The decision would determine whether Emma would have to testify again in a public trial, potentially re-traumatizing her for the sake of David's continued denials. Meanwhile, across town, Emma was making remarkable progress in her recovery. Dr. Sarah Chun documented the child's transformation from a silent, traumatized victim to a chatty, curious little girl who was finally free to express herself without fear. During their latest session, Emma had created a drawing that brought tears to Dr. Chun's eyes: stick figures holding hands under a bright sun, with the caption, "Emma is safe now," written in her improving handwriting. The difference in this child is miraculous, Dr. Chun noted in her progress report. Emma is not only speaking freely about her experiences, but she's also demonstrating remarkable resilience. She understands that speaking the truth protected her and helped other children too. She's actually proud of her courage, as she should be. The media circus surrounding the case intensified as David's trial date approached. Court TV requested permission to broadcast the proceedings while child advocacy groups organized rallies supporting Emma's courage. The tiny girl who had whispered, "Daddy hurts," in a Houston courtroom had become a symbol of hope for abuse survivors nationwide. Judge Williams, who would oversee the criminal trial, faced the most high-profile case of her career. The woman who had taken the unprecedented step of allowing Emma to testify now found herself at the center of a case that was rewriting the legal playbook for prosecuting sophisticated abusers. As Houston waited for David Martinez's final reckoning, Emma Martinez was already building her new life, one where her voice mattered, her truth was believed, and her courage had made her the most powerful person in the room despite being the smallest. The monster who had terrorized her was about to learn that some truths, once spoken, cannot be silenced or manipulated away. 3 years after Emma Martinez spoke those life-changing words in Judge Patricia Williams' courtroom, Houston's family court had become a very different place. The Emma Martinez child protection protocols were now standard procedure in courtrooms across Texas, with specialized training required for all judges handling custody cases involving allegations of abuse. Judge Williams herself had become a national advocate for child witness protection, speaking at conferences and helping draft legislation that would prevent other children from suffering in silence, as Emma had. On this particular morning in May, she sat in her chambers reviewing the final paperwork that would officially close the Martinez case forever. David Martinez had ultimately accepted the plea agreement, unable to face the prospect of Emma testifying again in a public trial that would have exposed even more damaging evidence. He was now serving his 8th year of a 12-year sentence at the Huntsville State Prison, where his former status as Houston elite meant nothing among the general population. Prison records showed he had been placed in protective custody twice, after altercations with other inmates who had learned about his crimes against a child. His fall from grace had been complete and irreversible. Martinez Development Corporation had been liquidated, with the proceeds going toward victim restitution and child advocacy programs. The River Oaks mansion had been sold, the proceeds funding Emma's college trust and therapy costs. Even his country club memberships and charity board positions had been revoked, his name scrubbed from buildings and plaques across the city. But the real transformation was visible in a small apartment in Houston's Heights neighborhood, where 6-year-old Emma Martinez was getting ready for her first day of first grade. The shy, traumatized toddler who had once hidden in closets had blossomed into a confident, articulate child whose laughter could be heard echoing through the hallways of her elementary school. "Mama, do you think Mrs. Rodriguez will like my backpack?" Emma asked, spinning around to show off the bright pink bag decorated with unicorns and rainbows. Her dark eyes, once haunted by fear, now sparkled with the natural curiosity and excitement of a child who felt truly safe for the first time in her life. Maria Martinez, now 32, but looking years younger than she had during the custody battle, smiled as she helped Emma adjust her backpack straps. The frightened, beaten-down woman who had once served coffee at Danny's diner had transformed herself into a powerful advocate for domestic violence survivors. She now worked as a counselor at the Houston Women's Center, using her experience to help other mothers escape abusive relationships. "Mrs. Rodriguez is going to love your backpack, Mia," Maria assured her daughter, using the Spanish endearment that Emma had requested she use more often. "And more importantly, she's going to love your beautiful, brave heart." The apartment itself reflected their new life, bright, cheerful, and filled with Emma's artwork, school projects, and photographs of happy moments that would have been impossible in their previous existence. Emma's bedroom was decorated according to her own choices, with stuffed animals scattered across unmade beds and art supplies organized in colorful bins. There was no compulsive organization here, no desperate attempt to avoid triggering rage. Through perfect behavior, Dr. Sarah Chun's final psychological evaluation, submitted to the court just weeks earlier, documented Emma's remarkable recovery in clinical terms that barely captured the miracle of her transformation. Patient demonstrates complete resolution of trauma-related symptoms, Dr. Chun had written. Speech development has exceeded normal parameters. Social integration is excellent, and patient shows no residual fear responses to authority figures or conflict situations. But beyond the clinical language was the story of a little girl who had not only survived systematic abuse, but had emerged stronger, more empathetic, and more articulate than many children twice her age. Emma had become something of a legend among child psychologists, proof that with proper support and protection, even the most traumatized children could heal completely. The ripple effects of Emma's courage continued expanding throughout Houston and beyond. The Emma's Voice Foundation, established with donations from across the country, had funded specialized training for law enforcement officers, teachers, and medical professionals in recognizing signs of sophisticated psychological abuse. More importantly, it had created safe houses specifically designed for children who needed to be removed from dangerous situations, while custody battles played out in court. Detective Michael Rodriguez, now promoted to lieutenant, and heading the department's newly expanded domestic violence unit, often spoke at training seminars about the Martinez case. "Emma Martinez changed how we investigate these crimes," he would tell rooms full of officers and social workers. "She showed us that children are often our most reliable witnesses if we just create safe spaces for them to speak their truth." The legal precedent set by Emma's testimony had been cited in family courts across the nation. The Martinez Standard now required judges to consider children's voices in custody decisions, with specialized protocols for taking testimony from young witnesses. Law schools taught Emma's case as a landmark example of how the legal system could evolve to better protect vulnerable victims. Perhaps most remarkably, Emma herself had become an inspiration to other children trapped in abusive situations. Letters arrived weekly at the Houston Children's Advocacy Center from young people who had found the courage to speak up after hearing Emma's story. Many included drawings similar to the ones Emma had created during her therapy sessions, stick figures, holding hands under bright suns with captions like, "I told the truth too, and I'm safe now like Emma." On this particular morning, as Emma skipped toward the school bus stop with her new backpack bouncing behind her, she had no idea that her story was still inspiring children across the country. She was focused on more immediate concerns, whether she would like her teacher, if she would make friends, and what they would serve for lunch in the cafeteria. But as the yellow school bus pulled up, and Emma climbed aboard with a cheerful "good morning" to the bus driver, she carried with her something far more valuable than school supplies. She carried the knowledge that her voice mattered, that adults could be trusted to protect her, and that speaking the truth, even when it was scary, was always the right choice. 3 simple words, "Daddy hurts," had not only saved Emma Martinez, but had created a legacy of protection for countless other children. The smallest voice in Judge Williams' courtroom had become the most powerful force for change in Houston's legal system. As the bus pulled away, carrying Emma toward her bright future, the little girl who had once hidden in closets was now ready to face the world with confidence, knowing that she had already overcome the worst thing that could happen to her. Everything else would be easy by comparison. Emma Martinez had not only survived her nightmare, she had transformed it into hope for thousands of other children who needed to know that their voices mattered too.